At 85 years old, Sir Ian McKellen sits quietly in his London home, surrounded by memories that shaped cinema history. When he looks at Gandalf, he doesn't see a wizard. He sees a lifetime of battles, losses, and quiet courage. He never expected a fantasy role to define his soul, yet it did. What if the staff wasn't just a prop? What if the magic was real? This is the untold truth behind the role that saved him, changed millions, and turned a simple wizard into a symbol of hope the world still needs today. For more than 2 decades, Ian McKellen spoke about the technical side of The Lord of the Rings, the scale, the stunts, the CGI, the spectacle. But now, at 85, the truth finally emerges. Gandalf was never just a role. He was a reflection, a confession, a lifetime of struggle and belief disguised as fantasy. The wizard wasn't only born from J.R.R. Tolkien's imagination or shaped by Peter Jackson's vision. Gandalf became every outsider who ever learned to survive by finding chosen family, every marginalized soul who refused to disappear, every aging man who would not surrender to darkness. In 1999, when Ian McKellen first received the script for The Fellowship of the Ring, he was 60 years old, a knighted legend of British theatre, a master of Shakespeare, decorated, respected, but still largely invisible to mainstream cinema. A year-long commitment in New Zealand, far from London. Playing a wizard in a fantasy film felt risky, even undignified. He hesitated. He worried it might become ridiculous. He worried it would pull him away from the stage that had defined his life. Then he read Tolkien. He read about a figure who stood against overwhelming darkness, who protected the innocent, who guided others without demanding power for himself. McKellen recognized something deeply familiar. As an openly gay man in an industry that once demanded silence, as an activist who stood up for LGBTQ+ rights when it was dangerous to do so, as someone who had spent decades being told to make himself smaller, Gandalf never hid. He stood openly in the light and challenged the darkness without fear. That realization changed everything. Ian McKellen called Peter Jackson back and accepted the role. Filming in New Zealand quickly proved more difficult than he expected. Not because of physical strain, but emotional isolation. He was separated from his partner, his theater community, his familiar world. The scale of the production overwhelmed him. Surrounded by green screens and unfamiliar technology, McKellen felt lost. There was a moment during filming when he simply broke down. Alone on a set, acting against nothing, he said through tears, "This is not why I became an actor." The crew comforted him. Peter Jackson reassured him. But McKellen felt like a fraud, terrified he had made the worst decision of his career. Everything changed when he saw the early footage. The technology was not erasing his craft, it was magnifying it. Gandalf felt real not because of visual effects, but because of Ian McKellen's eyes, his voice, his presence. The wizard existed because the humanity behind him was undeniable. The magic worked because it came from truth. Then came the moment that would define a generation. On the bridge of Khazad-dûm, facing the Balrog, Gandalf raises his staff and declares, "You shall not pass." For audiences, it became one of the most iconic lines in cinema history. For McKellen, it was not a performance. It was his life distilled into a single sentence. He had spent decades standing against prejudice, telling hatred it would not win, telling fear it would not rule. When he spoke those words, he was channeling every moment of resistance he had ever lived. When filming ended, he collapsed into a chair, exhausted and emotional. He had finally expressed something he had carried his entire life, that standing against evil, even when it costs everything, matters. As filming continued, the cast of The Fellowship of the Ring became exactly that, a real fellowship. Elijah Wood, Viggo Mortensen, Sean Astin, and Orlando Bloom endured long shoots, harsh conditions, and deep isolation together. Ian McKellen, the oldest among them, became a mentor. But for the first time in his career, he also felt something new: acceptance, belonging. They knew he was gay. It didn't matter. He was loved without condition. After decades of feeling respected but separate, McKellen finally felt like he belonged. Gandalf led the Fellowship on screen, but the Fellowship saved Ian McKellen in real life. When the Fellowship of the Ring premiered in December 2001, McKellen expected polite praise. Instead, the film became a global phenomenon. Children dressed as Gandalf, adults quoted his wisdom. The Academy Awards recognized him with a nomination at age 62. But the greatest impact didn't come from awards. It came from letters. From gay teenagers who saw Gandalf as a symbol of survival. From parents who thanked him for giving their children a moral compass. From people battling depression who found hope in Gandalf the White's return. Ian McKellen realized he hadn't just made a fantasy film. He had helped people endure their darkest moments. Years later, when Peter Jackson called about The Hobbit, McKellen hesitated again. He was 73. The role was physically demanding. But Gandalf felt like an old friend. He returned, even though the films felt different, overproduced, over-reliant on CGI. The soul of the original trilogy was missing. McKellen has been honest about it. He doesn't regret playing Gandalf again. He regrets that the films weren't worthy of the character. Not every sequel captures lightning twice. And that truth, too, had to be accepted. Now, at 85, Ian McKellen looks into the mirror and sees Gandalf looking back. The white hair, the deep lines, the ancient eyes. His body moves slower. Fatigue comes easier. But his mind remains sharp, his passion fierce. On difficult days when the industry feels distant and the world feels quieter, he thinks of Gandalf, still standing, still believing good would win. Somewhere along the way, the line between actor and character blurred. He didn't just play Gandalf, he became him. Yet McKellen carries regret. Not about the films, but about silence. He noticed problematic elements in Tolkien's world, racial coding, missed opportunities for inclusivity, and said nothing at the time. Now he speaks openly about it, not to diminish the legacy, but to acknowledge imperfection. Growth does not erase success. It deepens it. Gandalf was never perfect either. He was wise because he learned, not because he never failed. At 85, Ian McKellen finally understands Gandalf's true power. It was never magic. It was love. Love for the weak, the overlooked, the vulnerable. That same love drove McKellen's activism, his art, his life. Audiences didn't just admire Gandalf. They felt protected by him, seen by him. That was the real legacy. As Ian McKellen grows older, the magic of Gandalf refuses to fade. That final walk through the Shire may never be filmed, but its meaning lives on in every viewer who found hope in his courage. Legends don't end, they echo. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe, and keep believing that even in darkness, hope will always stand and say, "You shall not pass."